I'm really getting tired of the snow.
It's turning to mud now, yuck.
It's mud, and this time of year, once you got the holidays behind you, you'd really wish you had the snow behind you. So we're going to go to LA.
Yes.
Where it's nice, and it's sunny, and it's California.
That's
and
right.
We're taking you guys along with us. We're going to go see the LA Live Steamers at Griffith Park. And this week, we're going to be looking at the Walt Disney connection, because he was a member there.
Yes.
For years and years and years. He was one of the old school guys there. So this week, LA Live Steamers, Walt Disney's connection at Griffith Park. The LA Live Steamers opened their operation in 1956, not coincidentally, the year after Disneyland opened. But what that means is a tremendous number of their members have, well, just passed away, including one of the old original guys, Walt Disney himself. Look at that.
That's so typical of the hobby these days.
Yeah, consider our lives with Al passing and what we've been through. Anyway, as a lot of people know, Walt Disney had a backyard railroad and he moved it here.
That little barn is sure classic Disney.
It's got Disney DNA all over it.
It sure does.
But he built this really neat backyard railroad at his house on Carrollwood Drive, and he kept his equipment in that beautiful little red barn. As it turns out, he was a master of screwing around. One of the reasons he was dismantling his backyard railroad and moving it is because he'd built a new railroad, a bigger railroad at his new amusement park, Disneyland. So he had a desire to move the 7.5-inch gauge railroad somewhere else. Here's a recreation of his one and only steam engine, the Lilly Belle, and that used to reside here in the Main Street station, but this is just a replica. The original is owned by the Disney family, and they have it on display at their family museum in San Francisco at the Presidio. His original plan was to move the entire railroad to the studio, but there just wasn't room there. So he tore out the track and brought that here to the LA Live Steamers, and relayed that entire track. They call that section of track the Disney Loop. The barn was left behind, but it was brought here in 1999 by the Carrollwood Foundation. And right next to the barn, something else from Disneyland is preserved. In this metal shed right here is one of the original passenger cars from Disneyland from 1955, the Combine Car 101. The car was acquired by the Carrollwood Foundation and brought here to the LA Live Steamers and restored. Surprisingly, I remember Disneyland when it looked like that. But when it first opened, this particular passenger train was running around the park. They only had 2 trains, and they left from 2 different stations, the Main Street station and the Frontierland station. But this train ran only from the Main Street station, and as you can see, it had regular coach cars. Well, they were difficult to get in and out of, so Disneyland decided to replace them and just get rid of the original cars. So they sold the 4 coaches to a private collector, and they've ended up on Rob Rossi's ranch. We've had some fun out there.
We sure have.
And he runs them on his railroad in Santa Margarita. Rob's got a couple of different steam engines. They're just movie steam engines. He calls his little private railroad the Pacific Coast Railway. Now here we see the 101 in Fullerton. It's right there by Disneyland.
Not very far.
And they have a Railroad Days kind of celebration there. And the Carrollwood people brought the car up for that. And here we see the car at Rob's Ranch. The Carrollwood people brought it up there, just to screw around with it.
So that's 5 of the original cars all running together.
That's almost the whole train.
Yes, it is.
Here's the locomotive from the original train, and of course that still runs at Disneyland, the E.P. Ripley, and the observation car from the back of the train was kept there at Disneyland. They now call it the Lilly Belle, and it runs typically on Fridays in the summer, but they don't run it very much. And here's another locomotive from Disneyland.
Oh, that's cute.
This was my absolute favorite ride at Disneyland as a kid, and they got rid of it. The Nature's Wonderland Railroad, and they had 2 of these little Porter-looking engines. They ran on electricity, not steam, but they tore the ride out to make room for Big Thunder Mountain, and they just kind of set these guys aside, and, well, they just sort of let them deteriorate, frankly.
No.
And they left it as sort of a display by the Rivers of America, but man, it was just tragic to see them just letting it go to pot this way. Fortunately, the Carolwood Society intervened and said, please donate that to us. So they took it over to Griffith Park and they put it on display for a while, and now it's been hauled away somewhere where it's being perfectly restored.
Good. We really need to get down there and see that when it's finished.
Let's plan on it. Notice that it's sitting on 7.5-inch gauge track. That looks a little odd. Now here's another of the old guys, Walt Kimball, and he really didn't run over at the LA Live Steamers because, well, his equipment wouldn't fit on their tracks. He had real live, honest-to-goodness, 3-foot gauge steam locomotives running in his backyard. But he was a fixture in the live steam community back then. And this is Jerry Best, who collected steam engines and sold them to the movie studios with one of his little engines, a plantation engine. He discovered at some point that there were all these little plantation engines in Hawaii, and he could buy them for practically nothing and bring them stateside and turn them into fun things.
Resto project.
Yeah, no kidding, but he gave this over to Walt Kimball, who turned it into a locomotive he called the Chloe, one of the cutest little engines in the history of cute little engines. That's it on the left. The one on the right is the Olomana, and that was Jerry's little engine. He fixed that up for himself, and he kept it mostly original. But the great temptation was to tear these things down and turn them into something fun, which is what they did at Disneyland. Both the number 3 and 4 here, the Ernest S. Marsh, were constructed out of plantation engines. Isn't that neat?
That is way cool.
And another of the animators at the studio, Olie Johnston, got one of these little plantation engines and turned it into this really cool little engine, which he named after his wife, the Marie E. He acquired the railroad ties from the old Viewliner train at Disneyland and laid track at his vacation home. This little engine belongs to John Lasseter now. Now, Olie Johnston had been playing with live steam engines way before these other guys. He was really a die-hard live steamer, and he had a 4 3/4-inch gauge railroad running in his yard.
How fun would that be?
Is that the neatest little thing? Little tiny trains just big enough to ride on. But again, with advancing age, the whole thing just became a lot of trouble to operate, and he decided to move it to the LA Live Steamers. And he had this really cool, cute little station. You recognize that.
Oh, I sure do.
It's the Grizzly Flats Depot from Walt Kimball's. And you built that really nice model of this.
That was fun.
Just really cool. But Walt Kimball had built this. Actually, he modified it out of an old movie set. It was used in this movie. It just consisted of a couple of walls and a roof because you never really got a decent look at it. But Ward got a hold of these set pieces and hauled them back to his house, and then he constructed a building with a full-on interior and stove and everything for heating it so that he could have a real live train station on his real live railroad. But isn't that just the neatest looking little depot?
I love it.
Well, Disney loved it too, so much that he recreated it at Disneyland. and there it is, the Frontierland Station, now New Orleans Square Station, but it's the Grizzly Flats again. And so it makes a good deal of sense that Olie Johnston would build a miniature version of it and have that on his little miniature railroad in his backyard. And that's been brought here to Griffith Park, and the LA Live Steamers was brought here in '99, and Olie signed the cement here to memorialize the event. That 4 3/4 inch gauge track is awfully narrow.
It sure is.
It's just tiny, and you don't see a lot of that in the United States. You do see it in Great Britain quite a bit, although there it's 5 inch. Somehow when it came to America, it became 4 3/4 inch, whatever. The LA Live Steamers have quite a bit of this 4 3/4 inch gauge track. You don't see that very often.
Not really.
You see a lot of 7.5 inch gauge, but here in the United States, you don't see this smaller size that much, but it's really, really popular here at the LA Live Steamers. They've actually got 4 different gauges running here at the LA Live Steamers. The usual 7.5, the 4 3/4, 3.5, and then they've got a bunch of number 1 gauge Garden Railroad. They've actually got 2 different Garden Railroads in number 1 gauge. Of course, what they have predominantly is the 7.5 inch gauge, and that's what everybody rides on. They actually sell rides on the 7.5 inch gauge, and well, we rode it.
Of course.
Had a ball doing it.
Oh, fun.
The smaller gauges are just for the individual members, which is really cool because, again, there are just not that many places for these guys to run. The LA Live Steamers is less than a mile from the Disney studios. It had been Walt's desire to bring his railroad to the studio. It just wouldn't fit, so he took it down to the LA Live Steamers instead. But his original plan was to move it here to his movie studio.
Looks like the 7 Dwarfs are holding up the show.
And just a couple of miles from there is the Carousel in Griffith Park. This is the actual birthplace of Disneyland.
Oh, wow. Oh, my goodness. I hope they're paying her enough.
Yeah, selling a few balloons here. Anyway, Walt Disney used to come over here, since it's right by the studio, and he'd bring his daughters, and they would ride the merry-go-round, and he would imagine himself owning his own merry-go-round and having his train there and having something of a little amusement park right there at the studio. And later on, he had the idea to put it right across the street from the studio. And well, the idea just kept getting bigger and bigger and bigger as he sat here watching this merry-go-round, designing Disneyland in his mind. Of course, over time, the dream got bigger than the footprint, and it could no longer be built here near Griffith Park or the studio, and Disney went looking for a much larger piece of land in Orange County, the rest, of course, being history.
We had to get selfies of ourselves sitting on Walt's bench.
Yes, the bench itself has been removed, but everybody has to sit on the new bench at the exact location where Disney sat envisioning Disneyland. The actual bench has been removed to the Walt Disney Museum at Disneyland. Well, that was fun.
It was.
Anything Walt Disney is always going to be fun.
Yes.
But it's just fascinating, all that history of Walt Disney that found its way to the LA Live Steamers.
Oh, no kidding.
I don't know how many people actually know that, so now you guys do.
Right.
How about that? In an upcoming show, we're heading right back over there to actually scope out the trains going round and round, and ride those and see much more of that, and get in behind the scenes and play with their steam engine, so on and so forth.
Yes.
Well, if you haven't been over to the channel, do pop on over to the channel. And if you're not a subscriber, please subscribe. It sort of helps out the universe because it keeps everything in balance. It's all very complicated. Google could explain it. I don't fully understand it.
No.
but it does. So the easy way to become a subscriber, if you're not already, is to click on the blue button. You ready? Zoing! Right there, the big blue button. That will make you a subscriber. Well, we're not sure how you found this movie on the internet, and we hope you didn't find it boring. And we will see you here again next week with some more LA Live Steamers.
Yes.
See you then.
See ya.
Bye-bye.
Bye.